Once more slowly. A little faster. Now faster. I do the initial step already knowing where I'm going to go. This is another technique you can use to counter your opponent's jab. It also works well when your opponent doesn't throw a punch. Either way. So my opponent throws a jab and I step to the outside of his lead foot. In addition to removing my head from my center line and causing him to miss his punch, it sets me up to throw a ridge hand strike to the side of his jaw. I can strike with the blade of my hand, or I can strike with the first two knuckles. Once I strike my opponent, I hook my left hand across his body and hook my right hand behind his lead leg. To get the takedown, I push into his chest with my left hand and pull his left leg with my right arm. Now at normal speed. Like I said before, this strike can be done with an open or closed hand. When you strike your opponent's chin, it is very effective. It works great to counter your opponent's jab. You want to hit your opponent's chin with your strike. The technique is applied the same when you're countering the jab as you would when entering with this technique. After landing the strike, one hand goes to his chest and the other hooks around his leg. You can strike with an open hand or a fist. After landing the strike, you immediately take him down.
Jogou o jab, entrei, sempre aprumando o adversário.
After executing the takedown, always end up on top of your opponent. Here I demonstrate how to counter an opponent's rear hook using a straight cross when in opposite fighting stances. To begin, I spot my opponent's hook coming and step my lead foot to the outside of his lead leg. At the same time, I throw a cross straight down the pipe. Because a straight punch has to travel less distance than a circular one, I land my strike before he can land his. Immediately after landing the cross, I follow up with the lead hook to the side of his jaw. Notice how I circle my rear leg around as I throw the hook. This gives me an even more dominant angle of attack, making it more difficult for my opponent to follow up with another strike. Slowly. Now fast. This is the same situation as the last. My opponent and me are in opposite fighting stances, and he throws a rear hook. Spotting his punch coming, I counter with the cross. However, in this situation, my strike forces my opponent backwards. Instead of following up with a lead hook, I throw a front kick, step forward to switch my stance, and then throw another cross. The kick can be to your opponent's stomach or to his face. A little faster. Slowly. In this scenario, my opponent steps forward and throws a cross, and I evade his strike by stepping backward and throwing a cross of my own. This utilizes both timing and distance and works wonderfully against fighters who like to advance when they throw punches. Instead of holding my ground, I will step back and counter. When you throw your punch, it doesn't have to be straight. It can come from over the top. Slowly. Faster. You step back to avoid the strike, and then push off your back leg and throw the punch. Now fast. This is another technique for evading the cross. However, instead of retreating backward, you step off to the side to evade your opponent's strike. At the same time, you counter with the lead hook. Landing the hook will open a pathway for the uppercut. And once you land the uppercut, hook your hand around the back of your opponent's head, pull his body into you, and throw a rear knee to his midsection. Normal speed. Now fast. Once more, slowly. I exit with the hook and then enter with the uppercut and the knee. Fast movement now. This is yet another technique for countering a cross. In this one, my opponent throws the cross and I slide my lead foot back to my rear foot to create distance between us. Once accomplished, I throw a front kick with my rear leg, step my kicking leg forward, throw a jab, and then follow up with a cross. Although my opponent initiated the attack, I am the one landing strikes. A little faster. Now slow. Exit, kick, enter, enter. A little faster. In this scenario, my opponent and me begin in opposite fighting stances. He throws a right cross, and I counter by stepping my lead foot to the outside of his lead foot. This removes my head from my center line. At the same time, I throw a cross of my own, landing to my opponent's face. Although we have already covered this technique, my opponent's reaction is different. Instead of backing away after I land the punch, he drops his elevation and shoots in for a takedown. Opponents will often do this when injured. To prevent him from accomplishing his goal, I position my elbows in front of his shoulders. Notice how this makes it very difficult for him to reach my legs. As he drives forward, reaching, I step back and then turn and pivot around him. Notice how this disrupts his forward momentum. After completing the turn, I push him away from me, land a kick, and then throw a punch. He enters, I defend, kick, and punch. Fast. Now I show how to counter a cross using a spinning back kick. This technique requires more distance between you and your opponent. If you're close, not only will your opponent be able to hit you, but you won't have enough room to land the kick. To prevent the technique from working against me, I will retract my lead leg as my opponent punches to create distance between us. Then I will kick. Slow. And now fast. One more time. I will create space when my opponent throws his punch by retracting my lead leg and then kick. Slow. And now fast. Now I spar with my brother using the countering techniques I just demonstrated.
ataque, Machida aqui.
A lot of times when you throw a punch such as a jab, your opponent will drop his elevation to evade the strike and then quickly shoot in underneath the strike and go for a takedown. As long as you perceive his elevation drop, you can counter using this technique. So I throw a jab, my opponent ducks underneath it and shoots in. Having spotted his elevation drop, I slide my lead leg back as I pull my jab back into my stance. At the same time, I pivot on my back foot and throw a rear uppercut. Normal movement.
Mais uma vez, eu começo o ataque, ele vem.
A little faster. Once more, I throw a jab, my opponent shoots in, and I counter with the uppercut. This is another technique for countering a takedown. So, my opponent comes forward to scoop up my legs. To counter, I place one hand on his head and the other hand on his shoulder, slide my lead foot back slightly, and throw a rear knee to his face. If your opponent is especially close when he shoots in, you might need to retract your front leg more in order for the technique to work. This is something you will get the hang of during training. You'll develop a better understanding of distance. Let's do it again at normal speed. Now fast. Once more slowly. And now fast. When your opponent shoots in for a takedown, a lot of times you won't have the time or footwork needed to evade his attack. In such a situation, your elbows are very important. When my opponent comes in, I will drive my elbows in front of his shoulders to slow his forward progress. If your elbows are up, there is nothing stopping him from entering and controlling your legs. Your elbows must be placed in front of his shoulders. This stops him cold. Once accomplished, I will place one hand over the other or simply place my palms on the back of my opponent's head. No matter which grip I choose, I retract my hips to create distance. Then, the next step is to drive my knee forward, striking my opponent's midsection or face. Now normal speed. First, block. Slowly, he enters and I block. Then I enter with the knee. Now fast. If your goal is to keep a fight standing, then you need to know how to avoid your opponent's takedowns by sprawling and then working back to your feet. I demonstrate how to do this in the following sequence. In this technique, your arms play a very important role. As my opponent shoots in, I dive both of my arms in front of his near shoulder to stifle his forward energy. For the best results, I cup my arms underneath his body on his torso and paste my torso to his back. As he reaches for my legs, I drive my hips down to the mat, with my upper body driving into his upper body as my